Hello there, Lunar Squadron. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about another one of our favorite Lucasfilm properties, Indiana Jones. As you all know, there have been a ton of set photos and other pieces of information floating around the internet about this upcoming Indiana Jones movie, aside from the fact that it's been delayed out the ass. I don't want to talk about this video. We're going to be talking about whether or not this new Indiana Jones film is going to be a time travel film. You heard that right, time travel film. We're going to get into it. Everything that we've seen on the internet, anywhere from set photos to small leaks that have come out, you are going to hear from it here. But first, we are well on our way to 2,000 subscribers here at Lunar Squadron, so both Nick and I would really appreciate it if you enjoyed the content. First off, leave a like on the video, and if you would like to, please feel inclined to join the Lunar Squadron. All you have to do is hit that little red subscribe button and the bell notification button right on next to it. It's going to let you know every time that Nick and I upload the latest and greatest Indiana Jones content. So, without further ado, Nick, you ready to get in this one?
I am so ready for this.
You guys all heard me correctly. I said it. Indiana Jones time travel film. Little, off the beaten path for Indiana Jones, but where are we coming from here, Nick?
So, since this film has started production, there has been a lot of photos and rumors and all kinds of stuff that has actually come out about this film. I'm really surprised how much has been allowed to be released. Like, we've gotten up close and personal pictures of Harrison Ford in the Indiana Jones outfit multiple times. Like, the security for this film when it comes to this kind of stuff is surprisingly pretty bad. So with that said, we here have put together a list of all of the things that we do know so far, and we are going to try and sit down and make sense of them and find out whether or not this whole time travel rumor that is floating around is actually something that is legit or we think is legit. So I think to start it off, we should just kind of go through the list that we've put together and just kind of delve into it, do some analysis, and give our thoughts on the situation. So the first thing that we do know is that a young Harrison Ford will appear in some way, whether that is a flashback sequence or they are traveling back in time. How we know this is we have seen set photos of Harrison Ford with the dots all over his face, which are used in CG in post-production to de-age. It's used for de-aging sequences. And we also have seen photos of stuntmen in young Harrison Ford mask, which I gotta say, those are scary how accurate they are. It looks just like a young Harrison Ford. Like, it's kind of terrifying, to be honest with you.
I want one. I want to run around the grocery store wearing a Harrison Ford mask, like just scaring people in the dairy aisle, being like, "Where's the milk?" And they're like, "Oh my god."
Get out of my grocery store.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm like, get the fuck out of my dairy aisle.
Get the fuck out of my house.
So what we do know is that young Harrison Ford, whether it be flashback sequences or traveling back in time, will show up. A young Indiana Jones will be in the next film. Another thing we do know is that the story will involve ancient Rome in some regard. We know that by the most recent leaked photos of the Roman boats, soldiers, and weapons. What we do not know, Andreas, is the context of these photos. Is this traveling back in time and Harrison Ford or Indiana Jones is going to be in ancient Rome? Or is it a flashback sequence to perhaps the important artifact or one of the important artifacts in the film? We really don't know. All we know is the set photos.
Yeah, I mean, at first I thought that, maybe there was a museum at one point and Indiana Jones is just, picking up some Roman armor. But no, there's like full-on soldiers with the garb and the boats and like the whole thing's going on. So, of course, ancient Rome, very long time ago, but what we also know is that a majority of this film is going to be set in the 1960s, per the word of James Mangold. So obviously, no ancient Romans walking around in the 1960s. So how is this whole thing going to add up? I think time travel starts to make more sense when you start to add up all these pieces from a plot perspective, of course, there could be flashbacks to a young Harrison Ford, but if we're flashing back all the way to ancient Rome, then how is Harrison Ford going to even be involved in that story? It doesn't really make sense. So, that might be an answer to this whole thing, right?
Yeah, it could possibly be. Another thing that we do know is that not only will the ancient Romans be involved in this, but we do have confirmation that the Nazis will show up as one of the main villains of the film, just like the previous entries in the Indiana Jones franchise. Now, of course, Andreas, we all know that the Nazis were not in power during the 1960s. They were in power in the 1930s and 1940s. So again, we are going to either be seeing flashback sequences to that, or again, perhaps time travel really is a main component of this upcoming film, which again, sounds kind of crazy until you consider the fact that there were aliens and a freaking UFO in the last one. So it really isn't that crazy when you think about it. Now, when it comes to the Nazis, there have been rumors floating around, nothing really concrete, nothing confirmed, nothing of that nature, just some rumors that have been floating around for a while about Die Glocke, which translates to the bell, and that is a fabled Nazi Wunderwaffe that had the capabilities of, it had anti-gravity capabilities, but it also had time travel capabilities. So that's just something interesting to keep in mind, that has been rumored in the past for this film, and now there is speculation with a lot of smoke about time travel being a big component in this film. It's just interesting to see these kind of pieces tie together. Now, not only are Nazis going to be in this film, one of the main villains is going to be a Nazi, isn't he?
Yeah, and kind of right along that same line of thinking, Nick, you were talking about, this fabled Nazi, experimental weapon. This particular villain, Mads Mikkelsen, is going to be a scientist. So if any crazy, Nazi general came up with one of these sort of devices like Die Glocke, maybe he was involved in some way. We do know from an Illuminati article that Mads Mikkelsen will be playing the villain in the newest installment of Indiana Jones. His character is described to us, as a quote from that article, as a Nazi scientist enlisted into NASA by the United States government to work on the space agency's moon landing initiative. And that's not all we have about moon landing in this movie, is it?
No, it's not. Actually, what we do know for sure is that the Apollo 11 moon landing will be a major backdrop in this film. We have seen numerous set photos all over the place of a parade taking place for the return of the Apollo 11 astronauts celebrating their successful mission. How that is going to factor into the film, we are not quite sure, but it does seem to be a major part of this film, whether that be a climax or whatever. But they put together a pretty big parade that they filmed, so pretty exciting to see where that Indiana Jones space race, you all know how I feel about space, so. The next point, and the last point, is a little crazy on our end. We kind of took this theory we came up with and we ran with it, probably a little further than we should have, but we're all just pure speculation at this point across the board. Until we get a trailer and until we see the film, we're not quite sure. But what we do know is that this film is filming all over the world. This appears to be a major globe-trotting film with all kinds of just great Indiana Jones classic action and story. Super excited for it. But this last little tidbit, this theory that we are running with, has to do with the set photos of Harrison Ford with a book about Syracuse in his bag. It is clearly visible in his bag. Now, what is Syracuse? We're not talking about the university up in New York. We're not talking about Syracuse University. We're talking about Syracuse, Italy, which happens to be the birthplace of Archimedes. Now, why is Archimedes important? Archimedes is important because of the myth or the story of him developing a quote-unquote heat ray, which he then used to defend the city of Syracuse from invasion. Now, why is a heat ray important, Andreas? Like, what does this have anything to do with Indiana Jones or Nazis or anything, right? It's just
I'm about to connect all the dots here. There's kind of like, a bunch of scattered points so far. But if you guys recalled back to earlier in our conversation, we talked about how the main villain in this movie, played by Mads Mikkelsen, will be a former Nazi scientist who specialized, in space. And we now have Harrison Ford walking around with this book about Syracuse. As we know, there's this whole, weapon that was developed that was kind of like a magnifying glass, which took the sun and then kind of, made a like beam weapon to destroy ships and such. So what we have is the Nazis had another fabled weapon known as the Sonnengewehr, which was this weapon that was fabled to be somewhat of a magnifying glass placed up into the atmosphere, which would be able to do crazy shit, guys. I'm talking boiling the ocean, burning down entire cities, something like somewhat of a Death Star for the Nazis that apparently Hermann Oberth developed, a German physicist, in 1929, which was a 100-meter wide concave mirror used to reflect sunlight onto a concentrated point on the Earth. Apparently this was some real stuff that the Nazis were trying to develop, and it would just kind of be a cool way to connect all of these dots here in this movie. Who knows? Maybe that's the super weapon that Harrison Ford is going to be trying to prevent from being made in this movie, so that you don't have, oceans being boiled and cities being burned to the ground, right? That would be kind of cool.
Yeah, and it is important to note before we wrap this all up and get out of here why those two are connected is that apparently this fabled Nazi Wunderwaffe, this Sonnengewehr, which just seems like the Nazis were... There's a lot of stories about what the Nazis were quote-unquote trying to develop, but this was supposedly influenced by Archimedes' heat ray. That's where the influence for the Sonnengewehr came from, so that is where the connection exists. So what we do know is that Indiana Jones was running around with a book about Syracuse. Archimedes is from Syracuse. Nazis will show up in some regard, and there is an actual connection there. So it is very interesting. It's just a theory that we've kind of run with. There's really no concrete evidence whether or not this is true, but it'd be kind of cool to look back in a few years and see if we were right about this. So that's kind of where this came from.
Well, tell us what you guys think. Do you guys think that this movie is going to have to do with this Die Glocke, which is that time travel Nazi technology, or is it going to have more to do with the Sonnengewehr that roots from this whole Indiana Jones holding the Syracuse book theory, or is it going to be an interplay of the both, or is it just going to be something entirely different? What do you guys think? Why are there Romans running around, and what's this whole Syracuse book about? Tell us your theories. We love to hear them just as much as we love coming up with our own. That's going to do it for this discussion, and as always, we will see you all next time.